very, very serious show. It's going to be fun though because learning is fun and thoughts are fun. It's a party of thoughts. He's laughing.
I can't see because I'm in the script page. So
Okay.
in 2016 and in his 2020 presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders brought language back in the United States lexicon that was deemed anachronistic political discourse. Socialism and Marxism were being seen now as viable strategies to fight off the perniciousness of neoliberal capitalism. In both runs, there was a push against the Sanders campaign that said it lacked a black agenda. In his first run for office, he was stopped mid-stump speech by BLM complaining about his quest for Medicare for all and return to Keynesian New Deal reforms not being black enough. Do you remember that?
I do.
BLM is an organization that is viewed by many in the public as the anti-carceral, anti-policing division of the left. Coming to prominence after the tragic killing of Trayvon Martin, they've been at the forefront of the protest movement to defund and in some cases abolish police. But after all their awareness raising around the policing issue, where are we now? Our guest Cedric Johnson in his latest book attempts to ask that question from his book, After Black Lives Matter. Given the sheer scale, magnitude, and diversity of 2020's resurgent Black Lives Matter protests, many pundits, scholars, and activists celebrated the George Floyd rebellion as a historic watershed, one where the possibility of real reform came into view. For too many, however, the euphoria of the moment suspended any critical analysis of what it all meant. This is a deeper problem on the US left. The tendency to read protest as always prefigurative rather than contingent, and as a manifestation of real power rather than a reflection of potential. Such wish fulfillment thinking, however, forgets that mass mobilization is not the same as organized power, and that mass mobilization is much easier now with the endless opportunities for expressing discontent provided by social media, online petition, memes, and vlogging. The scale of protests can be misleading, and their actual effectiveness, regardless of their size, is dependent on historical conjunctions, such as the balance of political forces, the organized power and capacity of opposition, and the clarity of objectives among activists. Throughout the opening decades of this century, ever larger protests have proved incapable of consolidating in a manner that might effectively oppose ruling class prerogatives. In recent memory, we have witnessed successive mass protests, turn of the century demonstrations against global capitalism, protests against the Bush administration's so-called war on terror, Occupy Wall Street encampments, anti-eviction campaigns, the March for Our Lives following the Parkland high school mass shooting, protests against police violence and ICE deportations, among others. But these have done little to depose capitalist class power and the advancing neoliberal project. If anything, the hegemony of finance capital, the war-making powers of the national security state, the criminalization of immigration, the power of the gun lobby, and the unaccountability of police are as entrenched as ever. That was from my friend and professor and author, The Reason Why Teray Reed comes on this show, the reason why Pascal Robert is my co-host. It all starts with this man right here. Please welcome Cedric Johnson. What's up?
Great to be here, man.
Very, very happy to have you. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm excited. We got the preview of this book. I actually went and bought it today. I bought
Thanks. Appreciate you.
I bought the ebook today.
All right.
Where's the receipt?
Oh wow, you're gonna be one. You're really gonna be.
Yeah, I mean that's how these conversations go.
You hit me with this, huh?
We coming for you, nigga.
That's what you hit me with.
We just started. You can't play that.
Well, shit. That's what you're gonna hit me with. I've been on white people shows all day yesterday, and then you're gonna N-word me like that in front of company.
Right.
That's why you got beat as a child.
Oh, ouch.
But Cedric, despite MT's comments, we both enjoyed your book, and I will pass on Pascal, who actually wrote the blurb from TIR. Also was a fan of your book. We appreciate the shout out. Someone sent me a picture of it the other day. They said, "Oh, I just bought Cedric Johnson's book." I think they saw that you were coming on the show, and they like got the book, and they said, "Oh, I see you guys are mentioning it." And so I was like, "Oh, hell yeah!"
Yeah, it's been like what, 3 years
Yes,
since I first appeared. It's been
yes,
a while.
Wow.
yeah, back in the day. And we were talking about BLM in your first appearance. It was one
That's
of the
right.
first I cut was us talking about, what did lead to those things, because I felt then and still feel now that those things didn't happen in a vacuum. There was a lot that was going on, and you definitely talk about that in depth in your book. And I mentioned this to you before the show in a text message, that in reading this book, and I'm also reading another Mike Davis book at the same time. He's an author I admire. It felt like there was moments of it where I felt like I was reading parts of City of Quartz, especially when he talks about the carceral state. I think you examine that with a very, very sober lens, and also we mentioned James Foreman locking up our own. I think we even mentioned it the first time you were on the show. I think you went even deeper than where that book goes in certain regards. And Toussaint even called me earlier today. She goes, "I really like this book."
Glad
I don't do that much. I don't do that much.
So wherever you guys are listening or watching the show, there should be links in the description. I believe someone has probably put links in the chat. Is that right, to MT? Because I can't see it.
Someone can put links in the chat in a moment.
Does
So
his
we
name
can do
this?
that.
Now, Cedric, there has been some criticism about the book.
Right.
You had a really kind of large write-up in the New Yorker. I'm sure when you wrote the book, you knew you'd face some harsh criticism. When you shared with me a while back that review in the New Yorker, it felt it was a bit heavy-handed in its critique towards the end of the review. In my opinion, it kind of glorified the protest movement from almost a baby boomer type nostalgia. What is your response to the critics of your work?
I mean, so there's probably two main lines of criticism so far, right? When you look at the piece by J. Caspian King, which I liked, right, for the most part, towards the end, he basically returns to 2020 and seems to suggest that I haven't really wrestled with those contradictions, right? That I haven't really thought through the impact and the power of 2020 and what it means, and that we simply can't turn away from it, right? That was something that people said to me and to Ray in the heat of the 2020 George Floyd rebellion, and basically saying that if you're going to criticize Black Lives Matter, now's not the time to do it, right? You shouldn't do it now because look at what's happening in the streets. This is significant. This is the largest mass protest that we've seen in the history of the country. And so if you're going to try to be critical of it, you're just out of step, you're tone deaf, you're not paying attention to what matters. It was interesting to hear the New Yorker review kind of echo that same sentiment, because we've had 3 years to think about this, right? And we've witnessed some changes that have taken place, no doubt, right? A lot of legislation, I think, just in the first year after George Floyd, 140 pieces of legislation at the state level across the country, right? That was enacted. So,
but how much of that legislation is titular? I mean, how much of it is really substantive legislation? I mean, I know California's had the chokehold, for example, outlawed since what, 82?
Right.
and the big George Floyd crime bill that Congress sets forth. And I know you're talking about state legislation, which is very different from federal, but that big sweeping legislation that was a response to this moment was like, we're going to federally outlaw chokeholds. But I think outside of Eric Garner, who died in a chokehold?
There's been other people who've died in them. I think, but the to your point though, right? The rates have remained the same in terms of civilians who've been killed by police. Since 2020, we see roughly around 1,100 people a year who were killed by police. So whatever legislation was passed, it hasn't necessarily made an impact on that, which we would hope for. But some gestures, I mean, I'm always careful to not say nothing has happened, because there are things that have happened. It may take a while for them to actually have an impact. So, just seeing some departments begin to experiment with mental health crisis units instead of having armed officers respond to different emergency situations, I think that's progressive, right? Even if we don't see the impact of it right now,
Mhm.
2 or 3 years from now, depending on what phase they're in, it can make a difference, right? So I'm all in favor of that. But I just thought it was wild that Kang would return to that, the 2020 election, and I mean 2020 protests, and talk about that as if we'll be enamored by it. We shouldn't be in a different critical mode in terms of thinking about what's happening now, right? And why haven't we seen reductions in the levels of police violence against civilians in the intervening years? So that was a problem. The other pushback I've gotten, and I don't know if you've seen some of this stuff as well, mainly on Twitter and in the dark wet uh, parts of social media where people like to fester and criticize. Um, People who haven't read the book, but who are upset that I would dare take up Black Lives Matter in a critical way, or dare to say that abolition as an ideology and as a political project may not be what we need, and may be actually out of step with what the vast majority of Americans want and need at this particular moment. So the book has been condemned in those corners for ideological reasons. And also, I think because I'm not a part of those academic cliques, just to be honest. I don't go to their conferences. I'm not invited to be on their panel discussions. I'm not on their dissertation committees. And so therefore I'm an easy target, somebody who they can take out on social media in a couple of hot takes without even having read the book.
Do you think it's because you're Black?
Look, if it's not because I'm Black, it's offensive to me because I'm Black, right? Because it's been 30 years since I started grad school, right? I started grad school fall of 1993 at Ohio State. And if the thing that you would want to do as a grad student that would completely disqualify you and get you pushed out of the program, it would be to speak up about a book without having really read it carefully, right? And so sheer hubris that you see in some of these social media contexts where people are willing to condemn, to revile, without even having any sort of knowledge of the the actual argument. To me, it's just, as an old fashioned guy, right? It's anti-intellectual, and it's petty, and it's whack, right? I mean, that's the best I can say about it. It's fucked up,
Look,
to be honest.
we are in the era of engagement, Sid, and this is not not cancel culture, but I want to speak to the manager culture. You definitely have a lot of cats that want to speak to the manager. When you wrote this book, in the book you say,
but I knew that was going to happen, right?
Well, yeah, that's I think you and Teray, recently we had Paul Prescott on the show, and we did a show about the GI Bill, and he wrote a paper about it. And it felt like a lot of the comments from a clip that I cut. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I try to have incendiary titles for these clips as clickbait. Sometimes it works. And Gene Bajlan actually has more fun making clickbait titles because he's way better at it than me. And I think he changed the title up slightly, but I think it was just like, I think it was reparations or a dead end, which is a quote from Paul, but it's taken totally out of context. And right there, it's almost like that made that thing show up in the algorithm of everyone that's got an
Oh man, you're chumming the waters, right?
Yeah. It's like
you're throwing the fish guts and the blood in the water.
It's like everybody with an onk in their profile. I'm getting yelled at, and I don't understand. I don't understand reparations. One person said, "Who I thought this was the most beautiful thing, that reparations is not a racial project." Interesting. Very interesting that you said that, especially in the context we were speaking in.
Well, you shouldn't talk so fast, man. I'm waiting for my check. Legislation goes through.
Well, that's why you're staying in California.
Cut your mouth, man. Exactly, right?